Are we good?
We are so good.
Okay, thanks
Happy to
for
have you here we've got coast to coast going on right now, Kerri. We're so happy to have you here. Take it away,
well,
my friend.
I'll speak to that really quickly. So I signed on at 2:20 Rhode Island time because I thought that we were in the East Coast time zone. So I've been watching everybody for a while. So thanks for having me. But my name is Kerri Sparling. I'm really excited to be joining you guys from Rhode Island, from my house that I've been in since March 13th, but we'll talk about that later. And I've been brought here virtually by the Tandem Diabetes Care Speaker Series. So you'll see a lot of tandem branding on my slides, just so you know. They are happy to sponsor me, but they are not completely responsible for anything I say that might make you mad. So in keeping with that theme, I'm going to show a couple disclosure slides from them. This is a disclosure they've asked me to make. I know you're all reading it. This is the other one they asked me to make. The font gets weird and small on this one, so you have to take a screenshot if you really care deeply. But this is that disclosure side. Got it? All set? Gonna move on. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1986 in September, and it was 33 years ago. And I actually had to use one of those online services that says, how long ago was September 1986? Because I've had type 1 so long that I actually forgot how long I had type 1, which was sort of trippy. But I've had it for 33 years. And for any Celtics fans, this is my Larry Bird Diversary year. When I was diagnosed in 86, I was not given a glucose meter to take home, at the start, because my mother, they existed at the time, but my mom wasn't ready for that kind of data influx. And so she opted to use the urinalysis kit that was offered up at the time. So we used this to check my blood sugar. We tested my urine using little test tube kits, and you drop the little like pause egg coloring kit style thing to change the color of my urine to determine how high or low my blood sugar was. That was archaic, and the data that I was getting was so old, but this is what I was using for the first month of my diagnosis. And I'm sure those of you in the chat, there's got to be somebody else who's used this thing before. My first injection, my practice injections, were done on fruit. So in the hospital, at Rhode Island Hospital, they gave me an orange, and they said, this is what you should use to practice injecting human skin. I was like, well, that's an orange. That seems a little less like human skin. But they said that it kind of had the same pop as human skin. So when I pressed the needle against the orange, it would sort of mimic what it would be like to put the syringe against my own skin. So this is what I used to practice insulin injections back in '86. And this was my first glucose meter. Now, if in the chat, if you have used this thing before, you'll remember that it took 120 seconds to procure a result. You had to use a giant bucket full of blood. You had to wipe a chem strip off with a cotton ball and then insert that chem strip into the machine in order to get a blood glucose result. This is so weird to look at now, knowing how far we've come. But when you compare it against the urine slide on the first one, it's kind of like, this is some real progress. So this is what I first used to check my blood sugar. And then this kind of takes a second, because this was what I used to lance my fingertip. It is so old that even the slide looks a tiny bit dusty from my perspective, but it was called the Autolet, and it was so gross to use. It made a sound that I still remember when you would cock the thing back and press that red button at the top. It would come launching over the top to lance your fingertip essentially off. And this is what I used at the age of 7 to check my blood sugar. Not comfortable, but a far cry from boiling syringes that some of my predecessors had to use. But when I, again, look at these things now, I'm like, we have really come a long way. So talking about diabetes technology is great, but the thing that's always been a big deal to me is the burden, the emotional burden and the emotional impact of diabetes on my life. And so I like to talk a lot about what it's like to manage the emotions of type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes, because managing a chronic health condition it takes up a lot of headspace. And sometimes if you're not in the right headspace to manage it, your outcomes can be worse. So the first big event I remember after my diagnosis was my first sleepover. So I'm in the middle there with the stuffed animal cat in my arms. And this sleepover took place for my best friend's birthday party 3 months after I was diagnosed. And this was a big deal because it was the first time that I was out in the wild as a kid with diabetes, the first time I was out of my parents' care. And it was what they perceived at the time as the right risk to take, because my parents wanted to make sure that diabetes was never perceived by me as something that was going to hold me back. And instead it was going to be this thing that I would have to work through, but that I could work through and life could be normal. So sending me on a sleepover was a scary thing for my mom to do with her newly minted kid with diabetes, but she did it anyway because she didn't want diabetes again to be perceived as that thing that would hold me back. And I remember this moment, not because it affected me diabetes-wise, but I just remember being asked to go on a sleepover and I was able to go. Diabetes was not a limiting factor. One thing that was a slight limiting factor, though, was an access to a diabetes community. And so normally at the TCOID events, we're in these rooms together and we're able to see one another and talk to one another and like hug and shake hands afterwards. And that is really cool because it proves that you are not alone. And I hope you guys realize that, we're all chatting and seeing one another, that we definitely aren't alone, even though these circumstances are slightly different. But I didn't have that at the outset of my diagnosis. And so my parents found this really cool diabetes camp for me in Oxford, Massachusetts, called the Clara Barton Camp for Diabetic Girls, is what it was called at the time. And every camper had type 1 diabetes, and every counselor had type 1 diabetes. And even the staff that worked in the dining hall and the lab where blood was drawn, those people had type 1 diabetes too. And so it really normalized the experience of diabetes, not so much the data collection aspects of it or the injections or pumps or whatever else, but just the fact that you were living with a chronic illness and you were not the only one who was. And I distinctly remember going to camp and having the camp nurse roll in this trolley full of syringes and insulin vials that all the kids would shoot up together before breakfast. And having that be normal when in my life at home, I was the only one who was doing that. That was such a powerful thing for how I perceived my diabetes and what context I put it in my life. This was actually a letter I found just a couple of weeks ago, because what do you do in quarantine other than clean out everything in your house? And so I found this old letter from a camp counselor for my first session at camp, where they wrote home to my parents and said that Kerri had learned to do her shot by herself again. She's proud of herself. The word again is a big part in here, because when I was first diagnosed, my parents did everything for me, and then they taught me to give my own injections. And then I went through this weird purgatory moment of a couple of months where I was afraid to give myself my own injection. And it was through being connected with my community and shown by them that this was going to be okay and we would do this together, that I mustered up the courage to do my own shots again. And camp was a huge part in making me feel capable and ready to do that. And so again is a big word there. Proud of herself is also kind of a big thing, but that's what community does. We kind of bolster one another up. And so diabetes wasn't a defining force in my life, but it did color a lot of the stuff that I did, even as a kid. This is another thing I found in my office while I was cleaning it out. And apparently I drew the first insulin pump, in my mind at least. This was a drawing that I had done for a science class, inventing my own machine. And it was supposed to be the insulin maker, the thing that I would use to control my diabetes so I didn't have to think about it anymore. And it looks like it's weird terms like a blood carrier. I don't know what that is. I'm not sure why there's a snail in the corner. But what it did was it showed that diabetes was something that I was always working in pursuit to make smaller and less invasive and more minimal in my existence. I always viewed diabetes as like the game of perfection. And I know some of you have played this, where it's the board that's got the pieces that are cut out and they match the pieces that are in the board, and the board is spring loaded. So you have like a minute and a half, or maybe even just a minute, to put all the pieces in the board where they belong. And then after a minute, the board spring loads into your face and all the pieces come flying out. And I feel like this is what I do every single day to try to manage diabetes. And it's something that you guys are doing too. So I know this resonates for you. There is no perfection. It is impossible to be perfect. The best we can do is continue to try to find that balance of doing our best with diabetes and not letting it completely eat our brains. And I know that you guys know what that's like to kind of go back and forth about those sorts of things. I like the cupcake slide, so I'll leave it up for a second, but kind of keeping in line with the mental aspects of life with type 1 or type 2 is that there's a lot of food guilt, and there's a lot of shame and stigma kind of baked into some of the stuff that we have to do on a daily basis. And so there was this one time where I lied to my mom about eating cupcakes. I had all the evidence that showed that I had done it, the blood sugar of 385, the cupcake wrapper in my garbage, the chocolate around my mouth. My breath smelled like chocolate, for crying out loud. But I kept saying, no, I didn't do it. I didn't eat it. I didn't eat it. And my mom was so mad at me, not because my blood sugar was high, but because I lied to her about it. And not just lied to her about it, but almost made it seem like it was something that I didn't have to think about all the time. And it was a really big moment for my mom and I, because it showed that diabetes, again, was not just data and not just going to the doctor and trying to tick all the boxes. It was trying to find a way to live well with diabetes and live in a healthy way that didn't make me feel overwhelmed by it. So she's like, listen, you need to go and think about what you've done. Think about these lies. I was like, okay. So I went and I wrote this list. I may be 9 at the time writing this. And so it's the if I want to live list. And it's pretty on the nose. The first thing on there is to test. So that meant to check my blood sugar with that ancient glucose meter and that awful Lansing device. No cheating meant to eat the diet that at the time was the American Diabetes Association exchange program. So I had to eat a fruit, a starch, a fat, a milk with every single meal, because it was tied directly to the amount of insulin that I was taking, which at the time was regular and MPH. So no cheating on that diet. shoot like mom tells me. Again, reading these things out loud makes it look super weird. But that meant if my mother said to take a unit of insulin, I was to take that 1 unit, not 3 units, not no units, to take what my mother was prescribing for me, to shoot up like mom told me to. Those first 3 things, and I show this slide a lot when I give talks, because those first 3 things are easy when you really think it through. Doing the mechanics of diabetes all day, every day, I can handle that. It's that last bit that gets kind of stressful, that be responsible. How responsible can you be all the time? Well, diabetes is going to test you and try to find out how responsible you can be. It's going to make you manage this daily to-do list of chronic illness management in conjunction and in the context of the rest of your life. And again, that is where finding that balance gets to be a little chaotic. And I found for me, community gave me the first step towards that balance. At first, it was diabetes camp, finding my peers where I could feel both proud and empowered by them. My blog, which was called 6 Until Me, and I wrote it for 14 years, was about sharing real life stories of life with diabetes, not just data points and what my A1C was, but what it was like to live with this diabetes, what it was like to integrate it into my actual life, to go on dates, to disclose it to a new employer, to have conversations with new and old friends, like just to get it into real life. And so sharing those stories helped me find a community of people who were also living with diabetes. Because at the time in 2005, you put diabetes into Google, you get a whole list of reasons why your life was going to be compromised. And I wanted to show that there was a life after diagnosis and to find people who were living that too. One thing, I don't know if it's been mentioned all over the place, but one thing that I've been struggling with lately is the context of diabetes on its own in real life, in addition to living within pandemic times. That is a headspace that I was admittedly ill prepared for. And I wanted to bring that up in this talk in particular, because if I have the audacity to call a talk Balancing Diabetes, you have to take mental health and emotional health into as part of that discussion. And so I'm hoping that people at home are doing things like seeking virtual or in-person mental health resources, whether it's a therapist or a psychologist or someone that you're talking to in a group setting that can help you manage some of the things that are diabetes and pandemic stress combined. If that's something that's tougher to access, things like connecting with peers, again, being at a TCOID conference, whether in person or virtually, can help you mitigate some of that stress, and it can alleviate some of that stress to know that you're not alone. So finding people who get it and are thinking and dealing with some of the same things that you are, huge thing. But also something that's not often discussed is the fact that you don't have to be actively participating in things like the diabetes online community, or if you're not quite ready for therapy appointments or can't access a therapy or a therapist, lurking in these communities can be really powerful. So if you don't want to engage in the chat thing, or you don't want to do a Zoom call with a bunch of people who have diabetes, just watching those things or reading those stories or knowing that there are people out there and engaging with them, even from a lurker perspective, can really boost your mental health. So I just want to make sure that I put this sort of brain slide in here, because it is important, especially now, to make sure that we are in the right headspace to manage diabetes, which on a good day can be kind of challenging. The community power is huge, because this is one of the only places where we can say certain things. And I know Jeremy has done this already, where you can say things like, oh, I'm high, and not have a whole bunch of people judge you. Or like this slide, you can go and get your A1C taken. You can get a result that you feel proud of that reflects your hard work. And then you might go and celebrate that awesome A1C with a cupcake, which sounds so weird out of the context of this bubble, but the people within this can celebrate and recognize the irony of that. I wanted to find people who knew what it was like to live with people who didn't have diabetes, but for those people to be trying to support us, those caregivers, the spouses, our children, our parents, like all of those people. I like to use this example because this was another example of my mom doing her best, but I'm the middle child. My brother is older, my sister is younger. And when I was diagnosed, my mom wanted to make sure that my brother and sister weren't missing out on the foods that she was told by my clinical team that I shouldn't be eating back in 1986. So she would go and buy frozen broccoli, and she would take the broccoli out, and she would put ice cream sandwiches inside the frozen broccoli box and then shut it back together and put it in the freezer. So she thought she was hiding it from her daughter with diabetes, but she felt like she was also making it available for her kids who didn't have diabetes. And it wasn't until I became a parent myself that I really appreciated and thanked my mom for the fine line that she had to walk during that weird time when there were a lot of don'ts associated with a diabetes diagnosis, while she was trying to make sure that her other kids weren't as directly impacted by the choices that we had to make for one. So I really did appreciate that. And this is something that I appreciate you guys for, because you know as well as I do that when your blood sugar is low, you will eat whatever it takes to bring that blood sugar up, whether it's the disgusting mashed up granola bar that's been in the bottom of your backpack for 16 years, or the Swedish fish that have fallen in between the center console of your car that probably have sand and dirt on them, but you may have stepped on them too. But if you're 32 and driving along, you need to pull over and eat those stupid things off the floor. But this slide is just to confess that this is the grossest thing I've ever eaten to treat a low blood sugar. They were in my daughter's Halloween candy haul one year, and we never ended up throwing them out because we're tacky, and we didn't have juice and glucose tabs or whatever else in one moment, and I had to eat the box of gummy boogers. And I am ashamed of that, but at the same time, I know you guys understand. And also, community gives you access to people who, they don't give you like the perfect Pinterest version of diabetes. So I like to show this slide because I like to show this slide. It looks pretty solid. You know, the graph is in the middle and looks like I know what I'm doing and I've got everything figured out, which is a complete lie because it's diabetes and it has a lot of variables. But our community, these people, those of us on this Zoom call and those of us who will get together eventually in person, are willing to zoom out, no pun intended, on diabetes and show the 24-hour graph, to show that for every graph that has the perfect straight line, there is going to be a day here and there where things just go bananas and you don't know what to do. And sometimes the only thing that helps is knowing that you're not the only person who struggles to keep things tight. I know this community gets that. It's why I like being part of this community and why I need this community, because this is the stuff that clinicians don't 100% understand, but people with diabetes, you do. Oh, this is my favorite slide. Second to last slide. I like to share it the most because I think it's the most accurate, and it really, more than the game perfection, sums up what diabetes is like. Is that there are going to be some days where you have no idea what you're doing at all. You eat exactly the same thing for breakfast, get a completely different blood sugar result for 4 days in a row. You have a terrible night's sleep because your CGM alarms are going off. You're struggling with your insurance company because they won't refill a prescription or charging you a crazy amount to fill something. And that is okay to say, I don't know how to do this. Because again, that is where community comes in. We can find that balance for one another by saying, you don't know how, I can help you. I can give you the tips and tricks that I learned to negotiate that insurance conversation. Or, oh, here's an idea that I have to make it easier to wear your insulin pump in your bathing suit. Or how do you find a low carb lunch on the go? Saying that you don't know what you're doing and putting it out there, it can create some really good dialogue in our community that helps us kind of crowdsource the best way to live well with diabetes, which I think is really important, especially now because we are all in a kind of new space of having no idea what we're doing, and knowing we're the only ones not feeling that way, again, is very, very empowering. But what I do want to leave with, and I hope you guys listened fast because I talk super fast, so sorry about that, is that there's a lot of doom and gloom at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of stuff that we are not sure how to do, but it is going to be okay. And the reason is because we are all going to get through this together, whether it's specific to COVID or it's generalized to diabetes. This is something that we as a group and as a community can manage, because we will band together and support one another when things get super weird. So I wanted to leave you guys with that. And then also to leave you with my contact information if you had any questions, or you wanted to, I don't know, connect offline or online. If you want me to talk fast at you through a Q&A, let me know. But yeah, that's kind of where we're ending on this one. We're in this together.
Well, thanks, Kerri, so much.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, it's good to see you again.
What's up?
All the way across the country. So, Kerri, thanks so much. It's always great to hear you talk, and I really love it. And you give such a great perspective. So we're really fortunate to have you part of this.
Thank you.
And, you know, it's my job to kind of wrap up the whole day in its entirety, which I honestly wish I could have about 2 weeks to think about, because it's been such a different day. You know, normally we do these conferences. If you guys have been at TCOID conferences, we do them in person, and they're in convention halls, and, you know, lots of people running around. And now, you know, we're in the office running around, making sure the recordings are coming up and popping up on Zoom, and everything's different. But I think really the silver lining, again, for me, is that we were supposed to be in Omaha. So you would have only been able to see us if you were within an hour or so of Omaha. And now you guys are all over the country, all over the world, literally. And it really has opened our eyes at TCOID to this concept that everybody living with diabetes should be able to have premier diabetes education and care regardless of where they live. And I see us moving forward, doing more of these virtual events, putting things more on demand to become a one-stop hub for diabetes education, because it's so sorely needed. Everything that we talked about today is relevant, and it's rapidly evolving, which is good news. That, things that if we did this talk a year ago or 2 years ago, it would be completely different. So it's hard for your providers to keep up with this stuff. So you guys have to be educated, learn, go to your providers with this information, stay empowered. And, I just love reading all the chat comments. And, I think because of Kerri's talk, we got on this idea of diabetes camp, and everybody's saying, I'm 80 years old. I go to diabetes camp. I'm 75, I'm 37, whatever. And I think what we're all saying there is that we want this community. And I think that's what TCOID really is, that yes, we usually do these in-person events, which kind of feel like a diabetes camp. And we're going to be doing these virtual, and I hope that people, reach out to other people that they've met on the chat. Having somebody else you can talk to, about a high blood sugar, low blood sugar, issues with weight or food or whatever it is. It's so powerful to have this community at your back. It's one of the best things that ever happened to me in terms of being diagnosed with diabetes, is getting, a golden ticket to be part of this club. Because, as Kerri usually says, if you see somebody out in the wild with insulin pump or continuous glucose monitor, or, you see them taking medications for diabetes, there's a certain compassion there that is just really powerful. So I think I want to leave you guys with just saying a profound thank you, first of all, to the TCOID team for just a massive effort to take everything that they've been doing for literally decades in person, moving this to a virtual forum, and have it go really well. And trying to get, the healthcare to be still part of it, which I was so happy to see people visiting those booths, and they're still going to be open after this for you guys to go see now. So a massive, effort on the TCOID team to make this go really well. A super big thanks to all of you guys tuning in, supporting TCOID. Please continue to come back for more education, and if it's in your wheelhouse, to donate to keep us, going here. And then just personally, I want to say that, I've really enjoyed this. I've missed TCOID. It's been kind of a vacant part of my life for the last few months. So seeing this come back in this new format, I'm super excited about, and glad that we can just continue to stay engaged with all of you, educate, empower, especially now more than ever. We really need each other. So I'm going to sign off and hand it over to Michelle, I think, for some kind of closing comments. But just to say again that the healthcare boost will continue to be open for you guys to peruse.
Thank you for attending from near and far. A follow-up email with recordings of today's presentation will be sent to your mailbox by the end of next week. Be sure to check us out at tcoyd.org, where we cover diabetes topics A through Z. Drive home safely. Oh yeah, you're already home.